The other part where people gasped in the theater when they were seeing the movie was the scene where Robbie mentions that the spotlight investigations take up to a year, and all the journalists were like, "Oh, imagine," and just as Alan was saying, it feels like that is a bygone era now of, ancient history. Do you think investigative journalism is it ancient history?
I don't think it's ancient history. There's a lot of good investigative journalism taking place in the United States, and I'm sure here in Canada. There's less of it than perhaps there was in the past. There's certainly less of it than I would like to see. There's less of it than there needs to be, and there always has been. I do think that we have the capacity within our news organizations, notwithstanding the diminished resources, to do this kind of work, to spend the time necessary. And I think that we have to do it. I think it's our readers expect it of us. If we don't do that, if we're not holding powerful institutions and powerful individuals accountable, I think it would be the most irresponsible thing we can do. At a time when people talk about the responsibility of journalism and journalists, well, I think not holding powerful individuals and powerful institutions accountable is the single most irresponsible thing we can do as journalists.
But is investigative journalism just for big papers with big backers?
I don't think so. My frame of reference, I guess, is largely the Pulitzer Prizes, and inevitably every year a prize goes to a smaller paper. Frequently does, I should say, and many of those are many of those prizes are for investigative work that they've done that required them to allocate resources, necessary resources to do that long-term work. It may not have taken a year, but it took a lot of time, and that suggests that it's really a matter of will, not just a matter of resources. I mean, one of the things that struck me in this whole process with this whole movie is how much in the way of journalistic resources is dedicated to covering celebrities, to covering movies, to speculating on who's going to win an Oscar. I mean, there are whole charts and things like that dedicated to that. Of course, I read them avidly these days, but which may explain why they published them in the first place. But it's really amazing to me that there is no shortage of resources to cover celebrities, to cover movies, to cover other aspects of pop culture. And I've been at a number of red carpet ceremonies, at an award ceremony, premieres, things like that. And there's a lot of press. And look, they have a job to do. I understand there's tremendous interest in it. I don't diminish it at all. We should cover that. But you have to wonder whether the resources are properly allocated.
Is that depressing to you?
No, I don't really get depressed. So, I mean, I'm a realist, and I recognize there's a market for that. I do think that I think realism should cause us to reflect a little bit more on what our readers really want from us. And I think to some degree, the disenchantment with the media is because of a sense that the media has abandoned its core mission. We know that people aren't going to be happy with us all the time. They may not be happy with us any of the time. We're always going to upset somebody, inevitably so. But I think ultimately people want us to find the truth, to tell it honestly, to tell it forthrightly, to tell it unflinchingly, and to do our work honorably. And I think they recognize that if we don't do it, no one is going to do that. Every time I've been involved in investigative reporting, certainly when I was at the Globe, doing stories about that, we were doing stories about that community. Whenever we had a significant investigation, I would get emails from readers saying, "We're glad that you did this story. If you hadn't done this story, nobody would have done this story. This is why we need the press. This is why I buy your newspaper." And it's the reason why I actually allocated more resources to investigative reporting in Boston than we had allocated previously. I mean, the Spotlight team today is 6 people, not the numbers you saw in the movie. So, and I think readers are grateful for that. That is I think that kind of work should be the essence of who we are, and it is, in my view, essentially our soul. And I don't think we can abandon that. I think we'd lose our business if we do that.
I have heard you say that investigations, they don't make a paper any money necessarily. The amount of resources that you put in versus what you get back. So how do you measure whether an investigation was worth the work that you put into it?
Well, I'm going to turn on my phone to read you something that I just before I came here, I turned off the phone for the microphone, but something that our owner, Jeff Bezos, said, which I'll get to in a minute when this thing powers on. But I think the value is not in an immediate return. It's not in the matter in terms of advertising and things like that. I think it's in terms of cementing a bond with our readers, which is something that we have to do. I think it's core to our brand. We like to talk about it in terms of our brand. I like to think of it in terms of our identity, or our, as I said, our soul. And I don't think that I think that when we abandon that people know that we've abandoned it, and they are disenchanted with us as a result. So, hold on here. So,
Marty has this, he was showing me at lunch today, this incredible app on his phone just for Marty. Nobody else can see it, but it basically, when you open it up, it shows you exactly how many people are on the front page at that very second.
Well, those are metrics. So, and that gets to this point. So these are, we're obsessed with metrics. By the second, we know how many people are on the site. We know what they're reading. We know where they came from. We know how much time they spent on the story. We know how fast they read stories. We know how far they scrolled in the story. We know a lot. But so this is what Jeff Bezos was just at our in Washington and he did a town hall with us. And he said this, and I really liked it, so I thought I'd just bring it along. He said, metrics are always important. You need to make sure you're measuring the right things. Some things are so hard to measure that you really can't measure them. You have to use gut feel and intuition. And there are other things that are elevated, that are principles, that you care so much about them, that even if the metrics told you to do the opposite, you'd still do what your principles tell you what to do. I believe that.
It is interesting because when you were looking at your metrics meter there today, we were having a giggle because the stories that were getting the most hits, and you said that it's kind of obsessive that you look through them. One was about the Zika virus and a mother who was raising 2 kids with microencephaly. But then there was a story that we had lunch with all the journalism faculty, and they were wondering what we were laughing at. And it was something about resting bitch face. And I said, so when you see that many hits, I mean, it just kind of seems to counteract who you are and the fact that, you value investigative journalism so much, but at the same time, you do think that there's room for those kind of clickbait stories.
Yeah, I don't do that necessarily as a clickbait. That was a bit of a clickbait headline. But I mean, I had never heard of this supposed phenomenon before, but do people know what that means? How many people? You do? Well, there you go. It's a legitimate subject. Everybody's interested, and everybody will go back home and find that story, I guarantee you. There was a study done. I mean, it basically is people who are at a moment of being expressionless, being impassive. They actually convey annoyance, boredom, and exasperation and all of that. I hope I don't have that expression. But so actually there's been a study as to why when some people are expressionless, they seem to have that attitude and other people don't. And they actually analyze the contours of the face. And so it was a study. And so this was a story about that study. But it wasn't the top thing on our site, I just want to say.
No. Oh, it was like the 3rd, I think, yeah.
I think it was like 4th or 5th.
I just, yeah.